For over a century, history has whispered one warning before every major collapse. A pattern stretching across empires, economies, and generations. It appeared before the Great Depression, before the dot-com bust, before the 2008 meltdown. And now, after nearly 2 decades of silence, it has returned. This time, pointing directly to March 2027. Economists call it the 18-month decline cycle, a silent countdown embedded deep inside global markets, a pattern that begins slowly, with small cracks, then accelerates into panic, liquidation, and finally, capitulation. Most people never notice it. Most governments deny it. Most investors ignore it until it's too late. But those who understand it, prepare. Because every time this cycle has completed, the world has entered a crisis. And today, the signs are flashing again, louder than ever, clearer than ever, and dangerously close to the final stage. This is the story of that cycle, and why experts believe 2027 may mark the largest wealth wipeout of the century.
Every major economic crash passes through 5 distinct stages. 5 shadows that move silently before the fall. And today, every single one of them is already unfolding. The first is liquidity drain, when cheap money disappears. Central banks tighten, interest rates rise, and the world's credit engine slows. We crossed this stage in 2024. The second is asset inflation. Prices rise far beyond their real value. Stocks climb. Housing becomes unaffordable. Speculation replaces strategy. This shadow covered the world by 2025. The third is debt overload, the phase of false comfort. Households stretch every loan. Governments borrow to survive. Corporations refinance endlessly. Debt piles up like dry timber, waiting for a single spark. This is where we stand right now. The fourth shadow is confidence break, a slow psychological collapse. People stop trusting markets. Foreign investors pull back. Banks begin tightening lending, and the global system starts shaking. This has already begun beneath the surface. The fifth and final shadow is the crash event. A trigger no one sees coming. A geopolitical conflict, a rate shock, a failed bank, or simply fear, spreading faster than numbers can explain. Experts warn that all 5 shadows are now active, and the countdown to the final one may already be ticking.
So why does the pattern point specifically to March 2027? To understand that, we must rewind to the year 2025, a year marked by inflation spikes, currency stress, and record-breaking debt. Economists noticed the same curve inversion that preceded the 1973 oil crash, the 2000 dot-com crash, and the 2008 global collapse. Each time, the fall happened 14 to 24 months later. And when the 2025 inversion hit, models aligned toward one time frame, late Q1 of 2027. But the pattern doesn't stop there. Commodity cycles, credit cycles, and equity cycles all intersect in 2027. Global corporate debt maturities peak that year. Housing affordability hits its breaking point, and multiple countries face sovereign debt deadlines they cannot afford. It's a convergence, a rare moment when every pressure point aligns. Like tectonic plates beneath the financial world, building silent tension. For historians, these intersections have always preceded turmoil. For analysts, they are the strongest warning in decades. And for ordinary people, they are a reminder that the next 2 years may shape the rest of their lives.
Crashes don't hit everyone equally. They hit the middle class the hardest. Because their wealth isn't stored in gold or offshore accounts, it's stored in mortgages, car loans, and salaries. In the last decade, the middle class has already been shrinking. Income growth slowed, debt skyrocketed, expenses doubled, savings disappeared. A single global shock could push millions from comfortable
to barely surviving. When the crash hits, three things will happen simultaneously. Jobs will be cut, credit will freeze, and essential prices will rise. This triple impact is what destroys purchasing power. It happened in Argentina, in Greece, in Sri Lanka, in 2008 across America. And in 2027, experts fear it may hit multiple countries at once. The collapse of the middle class isn't sudden. It's slow erosion. One bill at a time, one delayed payment at a time, one emergency at a time. Until one day, people wake up and realize they can't afford the life they once had.
Crashes don't happen in isolation. They move like falling dominoes.
A bank in Europe collapses. Credit tightens worldwide. A currency in Asia weakens. Inflation rises globally. Oil prices swing. Energy markets shake. Supply chains freeze. Manufacturing slows. Modern economies are too interconnected, too fragile, too dependent on each other. Analysts predict that when the 2027 shock hits, three regions will fall first: emerging markets with high foreign debt, developed nations with overvalued housing, and countries that rely heavily on imported energy. When these dominoes fall, global trade could slow to a crawl. Markets may experience violent swings, and the world may enter a short but brutal recession. One that resets valuations, wealth, and global power balances. This isn't fear-mongering. This is mathematics, history, and debt cycles converging. And once the chain reaction begins, stopping it becomes nearly impossible.
We are now at the edge of the pattern. The final 18-month countdown. The world is not collapsing today, but the foundations beneath it are weakening. The signs are all around us. Historic debt levels, declining real wages, stagnant growth, asset bubbles, global political instability, currency devaluations, and rising distrust in financial institutions. Every data point echoes the same warning. The system is stretched to its limits. But history also shows something else. Crashes create survivors and winners. Not by chance, but by preparation. Those who understand cycles do not fear them. They use them. Because every collapse has a beginning, and every recovery has a turning point. March 2027 may be the breaking point, or the moment that reshapes wealth for the next decade. The final warning is here, and now the world must decide how it responds. For every crash in history, there were always forces operating behind the curtain. Not conspiracies, but powerful incentives. People and institutions whose decisions shape the fate of millions, often without anyone realizing it. In 2027, these silent architects are more influential than ever. Central banks printing trillions, tech giants controlling data flows, institutional investors moving markets with a single trade, governments borrowing at levels once considered impossible. When these power centers move in the same direction, a global shift becomes inevitable. And right now, all of them are reacting to the same threat: slowing growth, weakening demand, and a world drowning in debt. Behind closed doors, meetings are taking place. Policies are being rewritten. Budgets are being slashed. Military alliances are shifting. And in financial capitals from New York to Shanghai, elite decision makers are preparing for impact. Most people will never see these conversations. They will only feel the consequences. Because collapses aren't triggered by a single event. They are triggered by the decisions made years earlier, by choices meant to stabilize economies that end up destabilizing the world. The irony? The very institutions designed to prevent collapse often become the catalysts of the next one. And in financial capitals from New York to Shanghai, elite decision makers are preparing for impact.
Most people will never see these conversations. They will only feel the consequences. Because collapses aren't triggered by a single event. They are triggered by the decisions made years earlier. By choices meant to stabilize economies that end up destabilizing the world. The irony? The very institutions designed to prevent collapse often become the catalysts of the next one. So nations are forced to choose: save the currency or save the economy. History shows they can rarely do both. When the debt tsunami peaks, defaults will rise, credit will freeze, and the weakest sectors, real estate, small businesses, developing nations, will fall first. But as the wave grows, even the giants will tremble. Big banks, tech monopolies, sovereign governments, every system has a breaking point. And for the global economy, 2027 may be the moment when the tide finally turns. Every financial collapse eventually becomes a social collapse. Because money is never just money. It is stability, security, predictability. When those disappear, societies unravel. Slowly at first, then violently. By 2027, many countries will already be under pressure. Unemployment rising, savings evaporating, food and energy prices climbing, governments struggling to control inflation. And history is painfully clear about what happens next. Street protests, political polarization, currency panic, migration surges, crime waves, strikes. Not because people are chaotic, but because they are desperate. Because collapsing confidence creates collapsing order. The 2027 crash will not only reshape markets, it will reshape nations, creating new alliances, new political movements, new social tensions. Hidden resentments will surface. Economic frustration will turn into anger. And governments will face the ultimate test. Can they maintain order in a world where trust is breaking? The social breakpoint is not a prediction. It's the historical aftermath of every major collapse. And once it begins, recovery becomes far more complex than fixing an economy. It becomes a battle to restore faith in the system itself.
Crashes don't just shrink wealth. They redraw the world. After 1929, America rose. After World War II, Europe transformed. After 2008, China emerged stronger. And after 2027, a new global power map may form. Energy superpowers, resource-rich nations, technological hubs, financial safe havens. The countries that survive best will share one thing: resilience. Not military strength, not GDP size, but the ability to adapt quickly. As the old financial order weakens, new alliances will rise. Some nations will pivot toward digital currencies. Others will strengthen regional trade blocs. Some may abandon traditional financial systems entirely. Experts believe the 2027 crash could accelerate a decades-long shift: the decline of debt-based economies and the rise of production-based ones. The US will face challenges. Europe will confront fragmentation. Asia will move towards self-reliance. Africa will leverage resources. This is not the end of globalization, but the beginning of a new version of it, one shaped not by ideology, but by necessity. The world that emerges after 2027 will not look like the world we know today. It will be faster, harder, more competitive, and governed by those who can thrive under pressure.
The purpose of this documentary is not fear. It is clarity. Because clarity is the first step toward survival. While most people panic during crises, a small percentage prepare. They study cycles. They adjust early. They remove emotional decision-making. They build resilience. The survival blueprint begins with 3 principles: protect capital, increase liquidity, reduce unnecessary risk. It continues with strategic positioning, shifting from speculative assets to real value, strengthening emergency funds, diversifying income sources, studying historical recovery patterns. The next step is skill building, because in every recession, people with rare skills rise fastest. People who can solve problems, adapt quickly, and create value when others feel trapped. Finally, the blueprint ends with mindset. Because collapses reward discipline, not fear. Patience, not panic. Strategy, not emotion. The crash of 2027 is not written in stone, but the warnings are loud, the cycles are aligned, and the window to prepare is narrowing. History gives every generation one defining crisis. How you respond to it will determine your path for the next decade. This is not the end. This is the beginning of the chapter where your choices matter most.